treasure and responsibility. My name is Lindsay Lunau, and I'm an environmental educator with the City of Calgary, and I'll be moderating this session today. You might be wondering why you're in an Alberta Council for Environmental Education session being moderated by someone from the City of Calgary, and it's because we have a very strong partnership in delivering environmental education across the city, and we work very closely together, and so we're splitting the time between concurrent workshops. So I'm really lucky today to be joined by three wonderful folks in the environmental education field. First, Katrina Terrell from the Alberta Institute for Wildlife Conservation, and Megan Dick and Barb Kowalczyk from the City of Calgary. Please note that throughout our presentation, we're going to be sharing a lot of really useful information, links within the PowerPoints, as well as extra resources. And we've prepared a package for you that will be available for download. So I'm just going to put a quick link into the chat. We're just asking for your name and email address and some optional other information if you'd like to put it in there. But we'll make sure that you get everything that you need at the end of the presentation, so you don't have to worry about taking down notes or anything like that. So I just want to be very clear that our presentation today is being recorded. So just be aware of that if you are going to share your video and ask any questions. And all of the recordings of the sessions that are being offered through the Teachers Convention will be posted at the Alberta Council of Environmental Education's website. So if you missed a session and you'd like to check it out, please go ahead and visit that afterwards. They should be posted next week. So this workshop is part of a two-day symposium, environmental symposium, titled Hand in Hand, Working Together Towards a Sustainable Calgary. And this symposium represents a collaboration between the City of Calgary, the Alberta Council for Environmental Education, and our environmental education community. The symposium itself consists of 12 exciting sessions that are covering a range of topics, including eco-schools certification, biodiversity, water management, waste management, climate change, and Indigenous perspectives. All of our sessions feature multiple speakers, including seasoned environmental educators, and almost all of them have City of Calgary experts as well. So to better meet your teaching needs, we divided the sessions into an elementary and secondary stream. So I want you to be aware that this workshop is specifically designed for 7 to 12 teachers. If you're teaching younger students, you're more than welcome to stay. But we also want to bring your attention to the parallel workshop that we designed specific for elementary teachers, titled Nature in the City, Place-Based Education Through Citizen Science. And that was recorded yesterday and will be posted to the ACE website. For those of you who are not familiar with ACE, or the Alberta Council for Environmental Education, they are a small nonprofit organization whose mission is to advance environmental education in Alberta's K-12 schools. And their vision is that Alberta's students are environmentally literate and equipped with the knowledge and skills to create a sustainable future. On a side note, they also have, I think, the best conferences out of any groups. So now that you know a little bit about us, we'd like to know a little bit about you. It would be great to get a sense of who is with us in the room today. So if you wouldn't mind using the chat to introduce yourself, share your name if you haven't logged on with your real name, and also please share with us which school or schools you teach at and which grades or subjects that you're teaching as well. So here is our plan for today. So starting off with an introduction on local biodiversity and how it is being affected by climate change with Katrina. And that will be followed up with Megan and Barb sharing City of Calgary initiatives to enhance biodiversity, then back over to me for a wrap up. So there will be a chance for Q&A after each of the presentations. I'll be monitoring the chat, so feel free to pop things into the chat. And then at the end, we will also be stopping the recording in case anyone would prefer to ask their question verbally by turning on their camera. So just before I hand it over to Katrina, I just want to acknowledge that Calgary is located on Treaty 7 territory, which is a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route of the Blackfoot nations, including the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai, as well as the Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nakoda First Nations and the Métis Region number 3. We further acknowledge that the long history of Indigenous peoples is inextricably tied to this land, and that a unique relationship exists between Indigenous peoples and the natural world. This relationship, which is based above all else on harmony with Mother Earth, has allowed the original inhabitants of these lands to survive and thrive for thousands of years. As the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has recognized, reconciliation will never occur unless we are able to reconcile with the earth. So today we honor and acknowledge the wonderful knowledge keepers, scientists, artists, youth, and teachers like yourselves who seek to move us towards reconciliation. And we'd also like to recognize another reality that teachers are facing this year with COVID, and the many challenges and constraints that teachers like you have to deal with because of it. We are mindful that you're dealing with a lot at the moment, and we want to express our deepest and most heartfelt gratitude for your dedication to keeping our students engaged in learning. I'm going to get emotional about this. You are true heroes, and we're so happy to be here to support you in the work that you do. So now that I'm emotional and I've expressed my sincere gratitude, I would like to invite Katrina. I'll stop sharing my screen, and if you wouldn't mind popping yours up there.
Thanks, Lindsay. And yeah, way to just make us all a little bit teary in the morning. Thank you. I really love doing that right before I have to present. So way to go. Okay. Oh, all right. Let's distract ourselves with cute animals. How about that? That always works well, right? So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for our session today. As Lindsay's mentioned, my name is Katrina Terrell, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about wildlife biodiversity, the effects of climate change on our wildlife, and maybe how you can incorporate that into your classroom learning as well. But before we start going into the nitty-gritty on that, just a couple words about what the Alberta Institute for Wildlife Conservation is. Just in case you've never heard of us before or don't know what's going on there, we'll make sure we talk a little bit about that organization that I'm from. So if you've never heard of us before, we're a nonprofit organization, and I'm located just outside of Calgary, Alberta. And the main focus of our organization is wildlife rehabilitation. So that means our main activities include things like rescuing, rehabilitating, and releasing injured and orphaned wild animals. This is generally from all over southern Alberta. So we rescue essentially animals from Didsbury down to Lethbridge and from Canmore out to Medicine Hat. So lots of different animals, and generally it's between 1,000 to 2,000 of these animals per year. Everything from teeny tiny little hummingbirds and baby birds all the way up to moose calves and bear cubs. So a huge diversity in animals that we're actually looking after. The other part of our organization, though, is educating members of the public about wildlife and wildlife issues. Over 95% of the animals that we admit to our hospital actually have to come in due to human-related issues. So the more awareness that we can build up about wildlife, the better our animals are actually going to fare, and hopefully won't have to come into the hospital at all. And this is where you as teachers come in, because you're able to actually bring that wildlife education into your classrooms as well. Not bringing wild animals in, though. Let's just be clear about that. Don't take an eagle into your room. It's not a good idea. Now, wildlife education and particularly biodiversity do have a lot of very strong links to our 7 to 12 curriculum, especially with science. So I've just included some of the major unit tie-ins here. Again, don't panic about writing this down. The slides are all going to be sent to you later, so you can observe those later. But I do want to also note that there are other curriculum links too that are not in the science curriculum. So I saw a couple people introducing themselves that are social science teachers. There's lots of great tie-ins with math, especially statistics, social studies, outdoor education, and if your school has a wildlife option, well, this is a great topic to cover in that wildlife option. So lots of different opportunities to actually bring biodiversity into your classrooms. But now, what is biodiversity? If you're not necessarily teaching this, you might have forgotten, or it's been a while since you've heard this. Biodiversity is the variety of life in a given area. So we're talking about all different kinds of living things. And some different levels of biodiversity exist as well. Most commonly, there's three major levels of biodiversity that we generally talk about as scientists. First of all, on the smallest scale, we can talk about genetic diversity. So this is genetic variations within and maybe between populations of the same species. So for instance, oh look, a basket of baby hares. So in this basket of baby hares, there is genetic diversity that exists. These hares are not all clones of each other. So we'd be looking at the differences in genes and maybe alleles between these different hares as well. Most commonly, though, when we talk about biodiversity, we talk about species diversity or species richness, which is the variety of different species in a given area. So for instance, this is where your typical food web would come in. Your species diversity is all of the different animals and plants, because remember, living things, plants are included in this, that are in a certain ecosystem. And then speaking of ecosystems, we've also got really large scale biodiversity, where we can look at this on an ecosystem level. And this is the variety of communities or ecosystems across a landscape. So for instance, you might want to look at the entirety of Canada. You could look at ecosystem diversity around the world. You could look at ecosystem diversity right here in Alberta, which is really what the focus of our presentation today is going to be on. But again, most commonly, we are talking about species diversity. And this is really one of the easiest ways to incorporate talking about biodiversity with your classrooms and with your students. So how does climate change affect our wildlife and why we want to talk about it? Well, for one thing, it's really going to impact us in more of an immediate future. Climate change can sound like something that's happening in other places, but there's a lot of evidence to show that this is happening right now here in Alberta as well. And one of the best ways to see that is to map out the ecosystem changes that are occurring across the province. Now, this is a map of the major types of ecosystems we currently have in Alberta. This is from the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute. And I've got a link to these maps later on. So if you want to use these yourself, by all means, they're free, they're ready to go. Now, with the ABMI, as they shorten it, they've done a lot of forecasts on what kind of changes we are likely to see in our ecosystems based on climate change and different climate change forecasts and models. So under their COOL model, the COOL model is 1.5 degrees Celsius increase over the next 60 years. So what ABMI is predicting, based on the current rainfall levels and a slight increase in temperature, is Alberta's going to look very different in 2080. Our ecosystem communities are going to be dramatically changed from where they are currently. You might notice that yellow and orange and red section there, that's our grasslands. And so that's going to expand upwards, north, close, actually coming over Edmonton as well. The parkland, which is the brown color in there, is moving north and expanding greatly as well. And our mixed wood, our boreal forest, which is in green, shrinks, becomes more fragmented. And our most dense boreal forest, which is that dark green, is actually almost gone out of the province, whereas before, right now, it's actually almost half of our ecosystems. So we're seeing big dramatic changes potentially coming even with a very small increase in climate change. And big dramatic changes in our ecosystems have big dramatic changes for our wildlife as well. And that's because many of our wild animals are adapted to their environment. They have adaptations specifically for the ecotype that they're living in. And if the environment changes and their adaptations are no longer helpful, then it has serious implications for our wildlife species. So if the animal's environment changes and they're not able to, well, they're not suited anymore for their environment, generally there are three outcomes that can affect a wild animal population. For one, the animal might have a behavioral change to suit the new environment, potentially a physical change, but as we know, evolution is a very long scale process. It is more on the lines of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. So that likely will not happen fast enough when we're talking about rapid human-caused climate change. If the animal cannot change their behaviors to suit the new environment, then they might have to move to an environment that they're better suited to. Now, some animals are certainly more mobile than others. Birds, for instance, would likely be able to adapt to this changing situation by moving. However, that also comes with some energy costs, as we're going to talk about later. But if the animal cannot change and they cannot move to a new environment, then it's potential that that population could become extirpated or even extinct globally. So there's some really, really serious potential problems for our wild animal populations if our environments change as well. Now, in terms of climate change, one of the best examples to talk about the immediate impacts that are happening right now on wildlife is this very photogenic and lovely toad. If you're not an amphibian fan, I'm sorry, but I hope you will make room in your heart for this little guy. He's called a Spadefoot Toad. And Spadefoot Toads get their name because of those lovely shovel-like appendages on their back legs. So they use them to dig burrows and to kind of hunker down during the winter time. And Spadefoot Toads are quite unique for an amphibian because they live in the badlands of Alberta. Yeah, there's a dinosaur provincial park right there. That's where our Spadefoot Toads like to live. Obviously, not a lot of competition with other amphibians for this area. It's a desert, and amphibians typically don't do very well in dry places. Our Spadefoot Toad, though, are full of clay, so they retain water really, really well. And during the rainy season, what is going to happen is our frogs, or our toads, I should say, will lay their eggs in these ephemeral ponds. And then the tadpoles hatch extremely rapidly. Usually it's about 1 to 2 months before the tadpoles will metamorphose. However, with climate change trending towards hotter, potentially drier summers, many of these ephemeral ponds are actually going to dry up before the tadpoles are fully grown. So climate change is having an immediate impact on our Spadefoot toad populations. And in fact, they are considered a threatened species here in the province now because of the problems they're having with climate change. Right. Other animals are also going to be affected by climate change, including our mammals. Now, I did go a little outside of Alberta because there are more extreme examples for mammals there. We're seeing sometimes greater conflict with other species, which can lead to some interesting results, like hybridization between our polar bears and our grizzly bears. As our boreal forest shifts north, as our Arctic starts getting warmer, polar bears have to rely more on being on land than on the ice sheets. These populations start to overlap. And when the populations of these bears overlap, there have been isolated incidents, although they're starting to occur more, of hybridization. So we've got our Pisley, or our Grolar is what they call that hybrid. There's been a few of these now found in the wild, and genetically speaking, there's also some evidence that these guys have hybridized together in the past. So that's certainly occurring at the moment. We also see competition happening a little bit more often. And again, up in the Arctic, we're seeing a lot of competition happening between our orcas and our beluga whales. Now, our orca whales did not used to inhabit the Arctic Ocean really at all. And that's because they've got those lovely dorsal fins, which are absolutely no good if you are trying to get through an ice pack. That dorsal fin means that you lose heat very, very rapidly. And it also impacts your ability to stay close to the ice to look for breathing holes. Belugas have adapted to this icy environment. They've got no dorsal fin on their back. And that enables them to retain their body heat better in those icy conditions and stay close to the top of the ice sheet so they can find any tiny breathing holes possible. Now that the ice sheets are getting a little bit thinner though, and the water is slowly starting to get warmer, our orca whales have moved in. And orca whales will predate on our beluga whales. So our beluga whales are struggling population-wise, our orca whales are flourishing. So sometimes we're seeing some intense competition leading potentially to the eventual extinction of belugas in Canada. So that's a pretty scary thing to think about as well. And one final example I do want to chat about, and this is something that we can really start bringing our students into studying, are looking at our Alberta's birds. Because our birds are one of the most common things that we can see on our day-to-day lives. Sure, everybody has seen a wild bird out in their yards or out near their schools. And many of our birds here in Alberta are migratory, We have over 300 species of birds here in Alberta, and 200 of them do not care to stick around for the wintertime season. So what these birds will do is they will actually migrate south for the winter, come back here for the summertime. And many of these birds, like this lovely yellow-rumped warbler that I've got up here, like to hang out in the boreal forests for the summertime. Boreal forests are fantastic if you're an insectivorous bird, because there are, well, insects galore. If anyone's ever been up near Fort McMurray in the summertime, yes, bring your bug spray. The mosquitoes, the black flies, they'll eat you alive. And the birds absolutely love that. So it's worth the 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or even 1,000-kilometer journey to come up to our boreal forests for the summertime, because they can eat so many different insects. Their young can grow extremely fast with all of this food around, and then they can head back down to the south for the nice wintertime season instead. Now, the problem here is that, again, our habitats are shifting a little bit. And what's going to happen is that our boreal forest is shifting a little bit north. And so our warbler has to fly a little bit longer every single year in order to get to that habitat. We're also seeing climate change impacting our insect populations. For example, right now, we've got our lovely polar vortex happening. If this polar vortex came through in late March, that would actually delay our insect boom season up in the boreal forest, because it would be too cold for those bugs to get reproducing. If our insect season is delayed by even 1 to 2 weeks, that has huge implications for our migratory birds, because they arrive up in the north already at the very edge of their survival, and they need that insect boom to happen immediately. So the farther birds have to fly, the more energy they spend, and if the insects are delayed at all, it has really catastrophic implications for this population. Now, our songbirds are also one of the best species to actually study with climate change and the impacts of climate change in your classrooms. And one of the ways we can do this is we can measure the biodiversity of birds over time as it changes. And I recommend doing transect surveys to really bring this home to your classes. So the instructions for this are included in your PDF package. I've got some guiding questions in there and some data sheets, so don't have to worry about designing your own study. It's done for you. But the way these transect surveys work is that we have students plot out usually like a 1-kilometer route in their neighborhoods. It should be in a straight line so you don't count the same bird over and over again. And then have the students slowly walk this route and record the different bird species that they see. Once you've got everybody who's done their survey, you can have the students compile all the results together. You can use those to find out what kind of species richness you've got in your neighborhoods, how species richness changes over time. That's a great one, especially if you do this study every single month. You can kind of see how the bird populations shift. Talk about what factors are going to influence the species richness. Are you going to likely see more species near forested areas, more urban areas? Lots and lots and lots of potential here for some really great discussions. And as I mentioned, I do have a data sheet and instruction guide in the materials for this presentation. So no one panic, we've got that all set for you. But there is one thing that people get a little bit nervous about. Even though I say these surveys are really, really easy to do, it can be a little intimidating if you don't necessarily have confidence in your bird identification skills. And that is where, technology comes in very, very handy here. What I recommend everybody does is download this Merlin app. And it's developed by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. They are fantastic. And there's a lot of advantages to using these kind of apps, especially the Merlin app, for example. It's free. So we like that. No supplies required for this. It works on both iOS and Android devices, including iPads. It does not require data or Wi-Fi. So again, nice and accessible. And it uses 5 easy questions to help you determine what kind of bird you're looking at. So really quickly, in the last couple minutes here, what I thought we could do is actually go through how this works, so that really we're going to take the mystery out of it. No intimidation needed, because it is going to be very easy to use. The only disadvantages I've found with using this kind of technology is that it is a bit of a technology barrier if your students don't have their own smartphones. And it also does rely on visual observations. So if you do have any students who are visually impaired or have a harder time, that could be a bit of a drawback to using this kind of study. But let's go through what this app is going to look like so that we can see how it's going to work. And the best way to test an app like this, if you've never used it before, is to use a bird that hopefully you all know to start off with. So this is a robin. And assuming we saw this robin recently, which is very possible, there's quite a few robins who are sticking around during this winter, actually, we'll answer these questions through the Merlin app. So the first question is, where did you see the bird? And you don't have to give GPS, you can just say Calgary, that's absolutely fine. And when did you see the bird? 2 out of 5 questions. Very easy, very simple, just hit next. Then it asks you what size the bird was. And thankfully they are not asking for exact measurements, they just want the approximate size. So whether it was about the size of a sparrow, whether it was about the size of a blackbird, or a crow, or a goose, or somewhere in between those two. So there's only approximate sizes required. You do not need to measure the bird or give an exact size at all. For a robin, roughly blackbird sized, we move on. Question number 4 is what everybody always asks me. Well, I saw this bird that was brown. What kind of bird was it? We always look at the colors of birds first. And so you can pick up to 3 main colors that you see on this bird. For example, for a robin, it would be gray, black, orange. Those are the main colors. And final question was just a little bit of information on what the bird was doing. For a robin, you're most likely going to see them on the ground, picking at things on the ground. So we would select that. All of these information questions going together, we get a best matches list at the end of this. And it will give you the list of matches in the most likely to least likely order, taking into account what birds are most common in your area at that time of year that match the description you gave. So you can scroll through the list. If the first option isn't right, well, then you have others to go and look at too. The results page that you see also gives you audio recordings. So students can double check their results. If they're not really sure, they can listen to the song and then listen to the bird in the actual environment as well, and hopefully be able to confirm the species identification. Now, there is a more detailed video of this that you can show your students when you're getting them set up. So you can check out that Merlin at allaboutbirds.org, and that will show you all of the things you might need to know or answer any factual questions that you might have. So further resources, if you're looking to bring biodiversity into your classroom, I've just included a couple here. With our Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute apps, the Merlin app, and then also links to the education programs that I deliver if you're curious about other subjects that you might want to bring into your classroom. Now, if you do think of something after the session ends and I'm not here to answer questions anymore, you're welcome to email me. I've just put my email up there. It's just education@aiwc.ca. And I am right on time. Yes, excellent. Oh, perfect. I think we have 5 minutes for questions. So if anybody wants to put those into the chat, Lindsay, I think will be facilitating our question and answer period here for the next 5 minutes.
Yep, so both Leah and I have our eyes on the chat, so if anyone wants to throw any questions in for Katrina, we're happy to answer those. But I do have just some questions for you about the animals that you're seeing at your center. So what was the animal you saw the most of this year?
Oh, good question. There's a lot of ducklings that come in. I think we had over 120 mallard ducklings come in. And partly that's because people, unfortunately, sometimes want to help them move along. The mallards will nest about 2 kilometers away from their water source and then walk to the water. Sometimes people get a little excited, they want to help out, and they end up chasing the mother away. So that's one reason we get a lot of mallard ducklings in.
Yeah, that's too bad, actually.
I know. Best intentions.
And I guess, like, keeping in mind with the changing climate, is there any animals that you've been getting that are unexpected for this area?
Certainly there's lots of those kind of things that do crop up. As I mentioned, we've actually gotten like robins in recently. We get a lot of waterfowl during the winter time as well. And we're actually seeing increases in the number of waterfowl that are sticking around for the winter. I know there's a pelican out in Frank Lake right now that we're keeping an eye on, swans out in the mountains. So these are animals that typically would migrate and seem to now, some of them are making the decision to not anymore because it's mild enough here, they feel like they can survive.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat right now. Oh, sorry. Someone's writing, I'm relatively new to Calgary. Are there any online resources that speak about flora and fauna of Alberta in general?
Oh goodness. Yeah, I'm fairly certain there are. Actually, you know what? Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute has some great resources there just on their main page. So just abmi.ca, they've got amazing studies on diversity of plants and animals here in Alberta. So that's certainly one to check out.
Yeah, I would also recommend the Bow Habitat Station. They've been moving a lot of online. And then once they're open again for field trips, that's a really cool place as well.
Yeah, Englewood Bird Sanctuary is a great place too to just go and check out here in Calgary if you're looking to do some bird spotting. That's a fantastic area.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue over to our next presenters because they have a lot to share about biodiversity from the city's perspective. So Katrina, can I ask you? Yeah, perfect. And Barb and Megan, I'm not sure who's sharing their screen, but if you could go ahead and do that. And then Katrina, if I could ask you just to monitor the chat. So if folks have specific questions for you, they can pop it in there and you can answer directly in the chat.
Sounds good.
Perfect. So this looks great, Barb. I can see your screen and you're unmuted. So I will just pass it right over to you. I'm so excited to hear your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having both Megan and I. We're very, very glad to be here. And we are going to be speaking today a bit about some of the City of Calgary's habitat restoration and naturalization work, as well as some of our local native pollinators. Sorry, I am not able to advance my slide. Oh, there we go.
Okay, and Barb, just so you know, both you and Megan, I don't have video for you.
I was going to say, so my internet connection is not the best. So while I'm presenting here, I'm just going to keep my video off to maintain my audio.
Sounds great.
Perfect. All right, so I'm going to start talking about bees because these are some of the pollinators that we are most familiar with. So worldwide, there's about 20,000 species of bees, but here in Alberta, there's about 300 native bees, give or take. So relative to honeybees, which are actually considered an agricultural species and closely monitored and managed, the amount of money and resources that are invested in protecting native bees is really negligible. All the more reason they're so important. So unlike European honeybees, our native bees here in Alberta, they evolved in North America and they're not kept in hives. Wild bees come in all shapes and sizes. Some are really easily recognizable, the large and fuzzy guys, while some of the other ones are really tiny and metallic blue. They wouldn't even necessarily be recognized as a bee to some of us. A lot of people are surprised to learn that 70% of our native bees make their homes in the ground. Well, the other 30% nest in tunnels or cavities. And this really speaks to the importance of habitat diversity necessary to support native bee populations. Behaviorally, our native bees are really docile and many of them are solitary. They don't swarm like a lot of honeybees do, and they really rarely sting. We know where bees occur locally and geographically around the City of Calgary, but we're really just learning what their preferred forage is. And this knowledge has a lot of value, obviously, for many different stakeholders. So as I'm sure you have all heard, pollinators need our help. There are a lot of threats facing bees and other pollinators today. And unfortunately, human land use practices have played a huge role in population declines. So firstly, habitat loss is a huge contributor. For example, when our cities now are a veritable desert for pollinators compared to, say, 100 years ago, when there were meadows of wildflowers all over this region of Alberta. And when habitat for wild insects is converted for development or agricultural uses, there are both fewer numbers and types of pollinators available to provide pollination services. Associated with agriculture, pesticide use has resulted in huge losses in both honey and wild native bee populations, as well as declines in other pollinator populations, so monarch butterflies being a huge one. And as if this wasn't enough, pollinators also face pressures of disease and climate change. So climate change is affecting the availability of resources for pollinators. And as the climate changes, as was mentioned, the spring emergence of pollinator species and other insects is becoming mismatched to the flowers that have evolved to attract them. And as far as diseases, native bees not only have to combat the pests and diseases that occur naturally here in Alberta, but they also have to contend with diseases spread by humans to both managed bee populations as well as our native bee and pollinator populations. So fortunately, it is not all doom and gloom. There are a lot of different ways we can help our native pollinators. And one of the ones which we're going to focus on today is by providing them with as much habitat and resources as is possible. And this is where naturalization comes in. So simply, naturalization involves reintroducing native plant species to an area such that the vegetation better represents that of the ecoregion. So for a long time, lawns were really this sign of affluence, and we now realize that these huge mowed turf areas don't support biodiversity. They require a massive amount of resource input in terms of watering and weeding, and they really don't provide resources for pollinators or habitat for urban wildlife. So along with providing habitat for pollinators, there are a lot of benefits to adding native vegetation to an area and naturalizing it. Not only do these types of projects decrease energy consumption, they reduce maintenance and they help improve soil, air, and water quality. Naturalization increases awareness of the huge importance of biodiversity, especially in urban areas, and they provide opportunities for education and environmental stewardship. Obviously, they provide habitat for wildlife, and I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but Calgary was recently named Canada's 36th bee city. And so as part of our commitment as a municipality to protecting habitat and providing resources for pollinators, naturalization projects on a municipal level help us meet these commitments. So the City of Calgary has completed well over 250 municipal naturalization projects. Some of the more prominent ones you might be familiar with are in areas like Canyon Meadows or Bridgeland. A lot of work has occurred along Memorial and in Coach Hill as well. And the left photo in this slide shows one of the bee houses at the Canyon Meadows Bee Boulevard. And this is a naturalization site that the city completed a few years ago. And in 2019, at this very site, actually, researchers found 2 endangered gypsy cuckoo bumblebees, which really speaks to the importance of areas like this for pollinators in urban landscapes. And we find as the awareness about the importance of natural areas and pollinators grows in Calgary, we've seen a huge increased interest from people in the community wanting to add natural elements to their properties. So we want these projects to be successful, and we've added a lot of resources online that people can access, and we'll provide links to these. So native plants and pollinators have a really close relationship, really important to humans and all life on the planet, because 75 to 95% of flowering plants require pollination services, and a third of the plants that we rely on for food are insect pollinated. So through their relationship with flowering plants, pollinators provide many hidden ecosystem services, so producing the oxygen we need, absorbing CO2, and they're responsible for helping keep our air and water clean. And I really want to emphasize the importance of native plants for pollinators. There's a lot of ornamentals. They're sold in garden centers that are really aesthetically pleasing to us, but they offer very few resources for pollinators. So it's really important to provide a diversity of native plants with varying flower shapes, sizes, and bloom times. And I assure you, if you plant it, they will come. So here are some great examples that are well adapted to Calgary's conditions and don't require a lot of water, and they're all perennials. So that means they come back every year. On the left, the purple, we have blazing star, some golden bean, yellow coneflower, yarrow, and on the right, there's purple coneflower. And again, I would like to caution now against using wildflower seed mixes. A lot of them have really romantic names and good intentions. They seem like a good idea, but research has shown that a lot of these seed mixes contain non-native and even invasive plant species. So if you're looking to provide a wildflower seed mix, a really good choice is to buy individual seed packs and mix them together. And now I will hand it over to my colleague, Megan.
Thank you so much. I'm also going to keep my video off just so that there are no issues with the audio. So we've talked a lot about bees so far. Therefore, I'd like to mention the importance of other local pollinators and what you can do to support these species and overall be a pollinator. Moths, hummingbirds, and butterflies are the other pollinators that call our city home. Hummingbirds not only pollinate, but they assist with managing pests like aphids. Moths supplement the work of daytime pollinators and assist with the long-distance transfer of pollen. Overall, it's important to think about our pollinators year-round, yes, even in winter. Just like us, most of our native pollinators overwinter in Calgary. What's interesting is that although there is a shift towards naturalization, many people unknowingly kill or harm the pollinators they attract to their yards when they perform fall and spring cleanups. It's very important to have a messy yard for overwintering pollinators. This includes leaving leaf litter, mulch, and flower beds undisturbed as it provides winter habitat, improving the likelihood of pollinator survival. Committing to pollinators. Calgary has further demonstrated its commitment to supporting pollinators through becoming a bee city and participating in the Butterfly Way project, as the city recognizes the importance of habitat restoration and increasing biodiversity. Also, support for these initiatives shows how the city recognizes the direct connection between biodiversity and community well-being, as intact natural processes support health. It has been shown that time spent in a park or garden improves focus, concentration, and overall mental health. We need biodiversity to be personally and socially healthy. It is a core component of strong, cohesive, and inclusive communities. I'd now like to focus on how you can assist your students with developing knowledge of pollinators in our city. Calgary's stormwater ponds, trees, and flowers provide quality habitat for many types of pollinators. Therefore, consider what features of the natural areas near your school make it a good home for these species. With your students, walk around the community and try to identify areas where you might find pollinators like insects or birds. This helps students understand and be aware of critical habitat. While doing this, discuss if there are opportunities to improve pollinator habitat. For example, completing a litter cleanup or planting native wildflowers. This activity can be completed several times during the school year. While in the community, record observations of the pollinators you see and create a visual to illustrate the number and variety of pollinators you see throughout the year. There are many opportunities to connect this work to curriculum. For example, math through graphing and using nature journaling to capture language arts and science outcomes. Through this exercise, students will not only develop a greater understanding of the natural world, but also connect to their community and cultivate a sense of place. To expand on this work, consider how climate change threatens the survival of pollinators. Highlight the impacts that the loss of these vital species could have on the rest of the ecosystem. For instance, if pollinator populations continue to decline, which other species are affected and why? So I'd now like to expand on specific action projects your students could engage in to support pollinators. Consider how you and your students can be our pollinators, and share your findings with others in your school community. Maybe this involves mentoring younger students through sharing knowledge gained about local natural spaces, supporting your community garden, engaging in citizen science projects, or creating pollinator habitat in your community. The best approach is to select one action to protect these species. For example, perhaps your class would like to develop a small pollinator garden at your school. The next step would be to identify specific actions needed to make this project happen, such as researching what types of wildflowers to plant, who will assist with the maintenance of the garden, and how you will share your commitment to support pollinators with others. Other ideas include building a bee hotel, a butterfly bath, or even a hummingbird feeder. Another option is to participate in the Caring for Our Watersheds program, which is an environmental contest where students try to answer the question, what can you do to improve your watershed? And this program is available for students in grades 7 to 12, and more information can be found at caringforourwatersheds.com. And here's a list of additional resources mentioned throughout our presentation. The City of Calgary has amazing online resources regarding pollinators, naturalization, and activities to help these species. In addition, iNaturalist and Bumblebee Watch are citizen science initiatives that assist with capturing important pollinator data. So I'll just close our presentation with some important key messages about our pollinators from Calgary Captured, which is a wildlife monitoring program in our city. We hope you're interested to learn more about these species and commit to supporting pollinators in the future.
Megan and Barb, thank you so much. I do have some questions that have come into the chat. So I think the first one might be better for Barb because it's around plants. So someone is asking, what about thistles? So they know that they're great for bees, but sometimes they're taking over natural areas.
They can be, yeah, for sure. So they are great for pollinators. Some of our native bees are actually thistle specialists, whereas other bees are generalists and feed on a number of different native species. Some bees rely specifically on thistles. So in your yard, they can take over. And so, you know, there are other species that might be more appropriate on a private piece of property. In our natural areas, it's really up to the ecologists. There's some areas where we do have a number of thistles and the ecologists choose to leave them. There are other areas where they use some techniques, whether that be spraying or manually removing them to ensure they don't take over our natural areas.
Okay, and then just one more related to plants came in, Barb. So do you know if there's any guides about what plants to plant for naturalized gardens?
Yeah, so there's some fantastic resources on calgary.ca/pollinators, as well as calgary.ca/yardsmart. And those resources focus on, you know, shady areas, sunny areas, different soil types, and native plants that are appropriate for those spaces. So fantastic resources to look into.
Okay, and then Megan, I have a couple questions for you related to wasps. So the first one is, what role do wasps play in pollination?
I'm going to let Barb answer this one.
Okay.
So wasps do play a role. Wasps do play a role. They play less of a role than bees, but they still do play a role. We don't necessarily want them in our yards, especially if we have pets, small children, or allergies ourselves. And so, you know, there are things we can do as homeowners to decrease the likelihood of getting bit by a wasp. So they love sticky things, but wasps are carnivores. So wasps focus on different types of food sources than do our native bees. And so while they do play a part in pollinizing our native plants, not as big of a role as some other species.
Okay, and then there was a question about those murder hornets that we've heard about. Are those in Calgary or threatening our native bee species at all?
Not right now.
Okay, that's great. The next question is, have you built bumblebee boxes? Yes, so have you built some? And I'll read the rest of the question and ask the rest in a second.
Yeah, so the bumblebee and butterfly bath and the hummingbird feeder, those are going to be available in the handout that we provide. And we have links to that on our website. So it provides step-by-step instructions if you'd like to do those activities with your students. And it's a great, fun way to get them engaged in pollinators in our city.
Yeah, and I know my kids have built them based on your instructions, and they're got some bees coming in the summer, so that's great. there's a question about the process of creating a naturalization area at schools. Are either of you familiar with that process, or is that something that we would refer to the school boards?
I'm a little familiar just through my previous work with caring for our watersheds. And so initially you would, if you were interested in doing something like that, you would speak to your principal, and then it would need approval from the school board. And a lot of the times the question that comes up is maintenance, especially in the summer times. So it's just nice to develop a plan and kind of have a bit of, thought about who's going to take care of it when nobody's there to ensure it doesn't become unsightly and those types of things. But number one is speaking to your principal and then your school board. And I've never heard of an instance where a project like that has been turned down.
And I'll just add to that there's also a lot of grant funding available. So on the ACE website, they do list a variety of grant programs that you can apply for to start projects like naturalization areas. So I'd encourage you to check that out. Yeah, and I think that's all the questions that I have for now that have come in. But keep them coming. Oh, is the City of Calgary still using toxic herbicides? And if so, why do you think that is? Oh, this is an exciting question.
You want me to take this question?
Yeah.
So pesticide application through the city is controlled by the integrated pest management team through the Parks Department. And they put a lot of research into the areas they choose to spray, and the signage that goes up is quite extensive because obviously we want to ensure that all of our parks and green spaces are safe for our citizens and their pets to use. And so herbicide application does still happen in some areas of the city. And like I say, those decisions are made by integrated pest management based on the type and number of species that are there. We do have invasive plant species in some of our green spaces, and they spread incredibly quickly. And through the Weed Control Act, as a municipality, we are obligated to control those with herbicides.
Yeah, and I got really excited about that because I used to be the training officer in bylaw, and so we had to train our bylaw officers how to identify those species within the Weed Act that need to be eradicated. And so I learned a lot from the Parks Department and how a lot of removal actually is done manually from the Parks Department rather than through pesticides and herbicides.
For sure.
Yeah. Great question. Okay, so I will put my screen back up just to close things out, but there is a question of what plants are on the removal list. So top of mind for me was salt cedar when this conversation started, but Barb, I'll pass it back over to you for some of the other plants.
So they differentiate between noxious and prohibited noxious, and prohibited noxious weeds must be eradicated, and they suggest different removal methods based on the species. So sometimes it is, like you say, manual removal for something with a large taproot. Burdock is we have a lot of burdock. I think that's noxious. And so the noxious ones must be controlled. The prohibited noxious must be eradicated. And all that information is online, and there's fantastic pictures as well, and visuals of the plants and how to differentiate among them.
Yeah, clematis is another one that comes to mind. There's one type of clematis that's very prevalent.
All yellow clematis, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Barb and Megan, I'll just ask you to keep an eye on the chat and answer any further questions that come in there, if that would be okay. And just to wrap up, I wanted to share some resources that the Alberta Council for Environmental Education has developed for teachers. So they've put together these resource packs to help make the curriculum connections between environment and sustainability and climate change. And they've identified key links between each unit of science and social studies for 4 sustainability themes: nature and place, Indigenous perspectives, climate change, and then related to the City of Calgary's environmental and climate action plans and strategies. So up on this slide is just some examples from the grade 8 science curriculum on this side, and then the grade 7 science curriculum on this side. So the way that it looks when you visit their site is you basically go on and it's divided K to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and they're currently working on the high school curriculum links. So I believe they should be up by the end of the year. And then you can just click if you're doing sort of grade 9 social or grade 9 science, and the curriculum links are all built out for you right there. I did mention eco schools in the chat, but I do also want to bring your attention to connections to eco schools, the Eco Schools Canada program. So Eco Schools Canada is now here in Calgary and available to participate in for free for all Calgary schools. And so Eco Schools is an environmental certification program that features a library of 40 different eco actions that you can take within a class, within an eco club, or for a whole school. And the actions themselves support learning and action specifically around nature and biodiversity, but other things as well. So we've put the specific nature and biodiversity links on the left-hand side of this slide. So you can see that, you know, some of the initiatives that you might already be taking in your school or that you're thinking about are already considered eco actions from eco schools. So within eco schools, if you sign up or once you sign up, each eco action comes with its own guide, which makes it really easy for teachers to get started. And then schools can earn points by completing their actions. And so you can stay at a participant level, or you can work towards bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. And it's really exciting because we report the cumulative results of eco schools here in Calgary, so students can see how they're contributing not just within their own school, but in Calgary overall. And then eco schools also reports cumulative results nationally, so they can see how they're working with other students across the country. And so the Alberta Council for Environmental Education has also worked with our local environmental education community, wonderful folks like Katrina, to identify local resources to support all of those 40 available eco actions. So we really encourage you to check it out on ACEE's website. The City of Calgary is also really proud to partner and support Eco Schools Canada in Calgary, and will be providing on an ongoing basis subject matter experts like Barb and Megan to the program that can come virtually into your school and share information as you work through eco actions, should you choose to join. And I guess a reminder that it's not too late to come to our last session. It's happening today at 10:45, and it is Cradle to Grave, a whole system look at waste creation and waste management at home and abroad. And I've seen a preview of the presentation. It's really great. And Leah has posted a link to that in the chat for the symposium invite. Finally, I'd like to, on behalf of ACE, thank their funders who generously support their work to help teachers infuse more environmental education into their everyday teaching. Without the support of the funders, this work, of course, wouldn't be possible. And that brings me to our last slide. I hope you've enjoyed this session. If you'd like to follow up with any of us, we've provided our emails here. And Leah, again, will post that link into the chat so that you can receive a copy of the presentations with the links to all the resources. We've actually got a lot of resources for this session. So we will ask you to just go to that website. We just need you to enter your name and email address. Everything else is optional, but there is an option to give us some feedback, and we'd love to hear what you thought about the session, how we might be able to improve it, or what you'd like to hear about in future workshops. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your convention and your wonderful long weekend off. But I will just check the chat one more time. Leah, I'll ask you to stop the recording at this time. And that way, if anyone wants to ask questions with their video, you're